For the past 100 years, Canada has had a pretty sizable automotive manufacturing sector, and that includes a very robust supply chain. I think there are over 700 Canadian firms in that supply chain. But the electric vehicle manufacturing sector shares some of the supply chain, but in some parts of the EV supply chain are different. And that opens up opportunities outside of the traditional Ontario, Quebec supply chain location. So I'm going to talk to Matthew Fortier, who is the president and CEO of Accelerate, Canada's zero emission vehicle supply chain alliance, about what kind of opportunities there are for Alberta. Canada's the epicenter of Canada's energy industry. So welcome to the interview, Matthew.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I'm really curious here. You know, the Alberta government has talked a little bit about we'd like to get into the supply chain business, but most provincial governments in Canada are doing that. Yeah. What does Alberta have to? What does it bring to the potentially bring to the Canada the EV supply chain?
Yeah, you said at the beginning that there are real opportunities to expand the supply chain in our vehicle sector away from Ontario and Quebec. And I think that that's a really important point. So there are a lot of opportunities outside of central Canada. And Alberta happens to have a lot of what the world needs and what this industry needs, right? So one of the big advantages that Canada has got is an ESG advantage, right? So we've got, clean and renewable energy to power a lot of, the new mining projects and the new manufacturing projects that are going to need to come online. And Alberta just so happens to not only be the epicenter of the oil and gas industry in this country, but also of renewables and sustainable energy production. There's a lot of really great projects happening in Alberta. So that's an important point. And I think, too, there's a huge opportunity for hydrogen and there's a huge opportunity for lithium extraction. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But Alberta has a really big role to play, an outsized role, actually, in the future of electric vehicles in Canada.
Well, let's talk about electricity, because Alberta has the least regulated and really the most market-based electricity system in Canada. And that allows developers of wind and solar and batteries and other forms of renewable energy to develop their projects and then connect to the grid in a way you can't do in other provinces. So presumably there is a ready supply of clean electricity. And we already saw with the decision of LG Chem to not locate in Windsor because they couldn't get enough clean electricity. That really is the foundation, isn't it? If you don't have enough clean electricity, you're not going to be able to attract manufacturing in this industry.
Yeah, it's a cost decision for sure, but it's also an investment decision. So what you're seeing globally, particularly from big investment funds and sovereign funds, is sort of an ESG premium. And so people and funds will look for those areas where they can actually produce goods and materials, in the lowest carbon intensive way possible. And so having a clean grid is a huge bonus for any jurisdiction that's looking for foreign direct investment in this space or really any other sort of future industrial space. So that really does give Alberta a big advantage. And as you said, I mean, there's so much energy and innovation happening in the province that, I personally wouldn't be shocked to sort of see, IP and being developed in Alberta that's being used around the world in a few years because, there's just so much ingenuity. And a lot of that comes from traditional energy sectors. People have been trained in oil and gas, for example, who sort of see where the puck is going and really see that province as being, a champion for all sorts of energy forms going forward.
Well, bonus points to you for using the Walter Gretzky going where the puck is going, not where it's been analogy. Let's talk about ingenuity. It's a talent pool is a big consideration when companies are looking at setting up things like battery plants, isn't it? And of course, Alberta not only has all of that technical talent that's been in the oil and gas industry and services industry for a long time, but it's also developed over the last, maybe decade, a really robust technology sector as well. Yeah. And so when supply chain companies are looking to set up, that must be at the top, near the top of their priority list.
Yeah, it is. And, that's where kind of hubs are formed, right? So, you get one of these big anchor investments that comes to town, and all of a sudden smaller firms, spring up. In Alberta, you're seeing a lot of activity. You're seeing, the extra technologies pop up and build, large manufacturing facilities for drivetrain components. You're seeing, Summit Nanotech pop up, seeing E3 Metals pop up. Pop up is probably not a fair characterization. This is, years and years of labor, and all of a sudden you hear about them, you think they're overnight success stories. But it takes a lot of time and effort and innovation to get to that point, obviously. But a lot of the people who work for these firms are, folks who've been trained in more traditional sectors, or what we think of as more traditional sectors. So they sort of cut their teeth, in industries that we all grew up knowing and loving, and now are developing, the technologies of the future that will attract, those big, anchor investments into the province. I mean, people come to where the talent is, because it just, for all the reasons that we know, and they are coming to Alberta.
Well, let's talk about you mentioned E3 Metals and Summit Nanotech. And for viewers who haven't seen it yet, we've done a couple of interviews with Amanda Hall, the CEO of Summit Nanotech, who actually came out of the oil and gas industry. She was a geophysicist or geoscientist from there. But let's talk about mining and the extraction of lithium, because that's such a big part of the battery industry. Where is Alberta with respect to its lithium resources?
Well, I mean, what's interesting about the potential in Alberta is, you're looking at extracting lithium from brines, right? So, using the existing infrastructure that's there because of the oil and gas industry. And so, in a lot of ways, it's a more efficient and effective way of harvesting lithium. And so I think that is what differentiates the province from many other places where, lithium it can be found in some abundance. So, are we there yet in terms of making this a really affordable way of extracting and processing lithium? Not quite, but it is getting there. And that's what's really exciting. And the fact that you don't have to build the infrastructure, it's already there. I mean, it's not without work. You need to change some things, but at the same time, you don't need to dig the wells. And that's a really, really interesting prospect. And obviously, you saw the announcement between E3 and Imperial Oil recently, and that's exactly what that's about. And you're going to see more of that, because this is what the world needs going forward. The world needs lithium. The world needs these critical minerals and metals to build, the energy storage capabilities of the future.
How important is it, Matthew, that supply chains be regionalized now? And we saw supply chains, prior to the pandemic, it was a big issue. Supply chains that were stretched, I mean, literally around the world, suddenly were getting broken and couldn't access chips, couldn't access different minerals and so on. And so we heard a lot about big companies now wanting to re-onshore their supply chains. How important is that for Canada, and how does that give Alberta a leg up, because it can supply both Ontario and it can supply U.S. manufacturers as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's most important for Canada is to be an important part of the conversation. So I don't think you can reshore everything. I think if you've got a smaller industry with fewer components, then yes, maybe you can reshore an entire industry. Automotive is incredibly complex, and in fact, it's getting more complex. You have far fewer parts in an electric motor than you would in an ICE engine, but those parts are derived from minerals and metals that aren't extracted in Canada in some cases. So there's a lot of work to do to be able to build some of these components. So I don't know if you can reshore all of it, but I think what you need to do in Canada and in Alberta and every other region of the country is to become an important part of the conversation. And that is really what we're doing, right? We're trying to ensure that the sectors that are involved in the supply chain, going forward. So that is mining, that is battery processing, but that's also more traditional activities like parts manufacturing. You still need a hood, you still need a windshield, you still need seat belts, etc. And assembly of these vehicles are connected. And so if we can do that, then you will have more activity. Will you be able to reshore everything? I don't know. And I don't know if that's the point. I think that this is a highly integrated, particularly North American industry. So we want to continue to have that. We want to make sure that our American friends and colleagues and customers rely on Canada and vice versa. So this is integrated, but we do need to be more. We do need to be doing more on the upstream so that we can do more on the downstream.
I have a question for you, Matthew, that's fascinated me for a number of years, partly because there was a pickup truck prototype developed partly in Alberta called the Buffalo.
Okay.
No, it was the Bison. Sorry. And I interviewed the engineer who was in charge of that. It was a very interesting conversation because my takeaway from it was that if there are, opportunities within a particular market like Alberta with the energy industry where they need specialty vehicles, that these days now the manufacturers like GM and Ford, they all have their platforms for electric vehicles, the roller skates as they're called, and they will sell them, those roller skates, to specialty manufacturers. And so is there potential in Alberta to develop specialty EVs for things like cold weather resource extraction, that sort of thing?
Well, I not knowing the particulars of the Bison or what I would say is yes. And the reason I can say that confidently is because you've seen this happen before, particularly in the mining space, right? So you think of the McLean Engineerings of this world, they're based out of Collingwood, Ontario. I mean, not the epicenter of vehicle manufacturing, but they develop some of the world's best electric mining vehicles. And so, and they're integrating more upstream. So they're working with, the major mining companies, particularly in Northern Ontario. So the answer is yes. Again, it takes that entrepreneurship and innovation and risk taking, but it can happen in Alberta just as it can happen anywhere else. Of course, the advantage in Alberta is you have the extraction expertise, right? You have the pull demand. You have people who are doing things wherein they need these vehicles. And so therefore you can work and create that integrative hub.
Right. And I should point out, we live in Parksville on Vancouver Island, a city of about 10,000 people. And for many years, there's been a little company here that makes electric vehicles that are used in airports. They haul luggage carts around and that sort of thing. And then Parksville would be the last place on earth that I would think of an electric vehicle manufacturing company to be. But here it is. And if it can be done in Parksville, it's surely done in Alberta.
Yeah. And what I'd say too is when you have talent, and everybody says it comes down to talent. And sometimes that sounds a little bit too high level, but it's true. You've got the engineering talent, you've got the extraction talent, you've got people who understand how things are made and they understand business, right? Then all of a sudden, some really interesting things can happen. And, Alberta is primed for, and is so well positioned globally, even forget about North America, globally, to be a real leader in the next generation and next iterations of industrial activity in this country. You think of, yes, the geology specialists, the business, people, the mining engineers, the oil and gas engineers, these are people who know how to do things and create things.
Now, one of the areas, parts of the economy from which innovation often springs tend to be like universities, institutes of higher learning. A lot of research in both the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary are research post-secondary institutions. Yes. They've spun off all kinds of companies that have gone on to success. And in Alberta, there are other institutions like the Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Institute. Does that give Alberta a leg up on developing a ZEV supply chain?
Yes, and I think even higher up the value chain. So, I mean, we talked about upstream and extraction, but let's talk about downstream. Let's talk about the AI capabilities that can be developed out of it, the Edmonton AI hub, right? Talk about the innovation that's happening at the university level and these companies that are being spun off. These are really high tech and innovative companies that really kind of are research driven, that are risk taking. So that's a long way of saying that Alberta can actually be relevant upstream when we're talking about extraction and producing the battery materials. but further downstream as well, and the higher value work that requires engineering and deep thought leadership.
Matthew, thank you very much for your insights. Really appreciate this, and we'll look forward to chatting with you in future interviews about the ZEV supply chain potential in some of the other provinces.
Thanks very much, Mark.